The village of Kitali was quiet in the early morning. Sunlight streamed through the tall trees that surrounded the village, casting long, soft shadows across the dusty paths. Birds sang as the villagers began their daily routines, sweeping courtyards, fetching water from the well, and tending to small gardens near their huts. Life in Kitali was simple, peaceful, and predictable, yet Nia always felt there was more to discover. She was a girl of curious mind, always looking beyond what was ordinary. She wanted to understand everything she saw, and she never hesitated to ask questions, even questions that others thought silly. Nia was not like the other children in the village. While some preferred playing games or helping at home, she spent her time observing the smallest details. The patterns of leaves on the trees, the way ants carried tiny grains of food, and how the wind shifted the dust on the paths. She had a clever mind and a sharp eye for noticing things others missed. Villagers often said she would grow up to be a wise woman, though she was still young. Her friends admired her, though sometimes they thought she was too daring or too curious for her own good. One morning, as the sun rose and bathed the village in golden light, Nia noticed something unusual. A group of villagers had gathered near the edge of the forest, speaking in hushed tones. Their faces were serious, and they kept glancing toward the forest with a mix of fear and curiosity. Nia's eyes narrowed as she watched. Something about their whispers and cautious glances made her heart beat faster. She wanted to know what they were talking about. Quietly, she tiptoed closer, pretending to collect water from a nearby stream. She could hear snippets of their conversation. "It's dangerous," one man said in a low voice. "No one should go there," another replied. They spoke of a garden, abandoned and overgrown, that lay at the edge of the forest. The garden had once belonged to someone long ago, but no one remembered much about it. Over the years, weeds had taken over and people had stopped visiting. Some claimed it was cursed, though no one could explain why. Nia's curiosity soared. She felt a strange pull toward the garden, as if it was calling her by name. While the villagers whispered and avoided the forest, Nia decided that she must see the garden for herself. She imagined what it could look like, perhaps bright flowers hidden among the weeds, fruits hanging from forgotten trees, or even small animals that had made it their home. Her mind raced with possibilities, each one more exciting than the last. She knew the villagers would not approve of her going, but she had always trusted her instincts. Sometimes, the most interesting discoveries happened where others feared to go. Nia spent the rest of the morning preparing for her adventure. She packed a small basket with water, a few pieces of bread, and a tiny knife she often carried for cutting herbs or small branches. She wore her favorite sturdy shoes and tied her hair back so it would not get caught in branches. Every step she took was careful and deliberate, but her heart pounded with excitement. She felt brave even though she had never explored the forest alone before. As she approached the forest, the air changed. It was cooler, filled with the scent of leaves, soil, and something faintly sweet that she could not identify. Birds fluttered above, and a small breeze carried the soft rustling of trees. Nia paused at the edge, taking a deep breath. She could see the faint outline of the garden in the distance. Weeds covered the ground, twisted branches reached toward the sky, and the garden walls, once strong, were crumbling and covered in moss. Despite the wild appearance, there was something inviting about the place. She felt drawn forward, eager to uncover its secrets. Nia stepped into the garden, careful not to trip over roots or tangled vines. Each step made a soft crunch on the dry leaves covering the ground. She stopped often to observe small details: a patch of unusual flowers peeking through the weeds, a bird nesting in the corner of a broken wall, and sunlight catching the edge of a small pond hidden behind a clump of grass. It was like stepping into a different world, one untouched by the worries and routines of the village. As she explored, Nia found signs that the garden had once been well cared for. Broken tools lay scattered in the soil, and faded lines in the earth suggested that someone had planted rows of flowers and vegetables long ago. She imagined who might have lived here, tending the plants and enjoying the quiet of the garden. Nia felt a sense of connection to the past, as if the garden itself was speaking to her, asking her to continue what had been started. She wandered deeper into the garden, noticing small hidden corners where sunlight fell in patches. Tiny sprouts poked through the soil, glowing faintly as if alive with their own secret energy. Nia knelt and gently touched one of the sprouts, feeling its fragile strength. A thrill ran through her. Perhaps, she thought, the garden still held magic, waiting for someone brave enough to care for it again. She imagined the plants growing, flowers blooming, and fruits appearing on the trees. The thought made her heart race with excitement. While exploring, Nia also noticed signs of neglect. Some areas were overrun with weeds, Others had soil that had dried and cracked, and a few broken fences hinted that animals might have entered and caused damage. She realized that bringing the garden back to life would not be easy. It would take effort, patience, and care. Yet, instead of discouraging her, the challenge made her more determined. She loved solving problems, and this garden was full of them. Each small obstacle was a puzzle to figure out, and Nia's clever mind already began planning how she would tackle them. As the day wore on, Nia found a small hidden box buried under leaves near the edge of the garden. She carefully brushed away the dirt and lifted the lid. Inside were old seeds, dried but still intact, and a faded note. The writing was barely legible, but she could make out a few words. "These seeds can bring life to what seems lost." Nia's eyes widened. This was extraordinary. She held the box in her hands, feeling the weight of possibility. The garden was not just a forgotten place. It held potential, a promise that it could bloom again. Nia realized that she had discovered something special. She could see the future of the garden in her mind: bright flowers, tall trees, and fruits ready to be harvested. She could imagine children running among the plants, villagers picking vegetables, and animals finding shelter in the foliage. This garden could be a place of life, joy, and learning. And it was up to her to make that vision real. The thought filled Nia with determination. She decided she would return to the garden every day, caring for it until it was full of life again. She knew it would not be easy. There would be weeds to pull, soil to prepare, and seeds to plant carefully. But Nia did not feel afraid. She had faced challenges before, and she loved solving problems. Each step she took in the garden was a step toward discovery, learning, and perhaps even a little magic. As the sun began to set, casting a warm orange glow across the garden, Nia stood and looked around. Shadows stretched long between the trees, and the faint glow of the sprouts gave the garden a mysterious, magical feel. She smiled, feeling proud of what she had found. The garden was hers to explore, protect, and revive. And though the villagers might not understand, she knew in her heart that this was the beginning of something extraordinary. Nia carefully returned to the village, keeping the box of seeds hidden in her basket. Her mind raced with plans: how she would clear the weeds, prepare the soil, and plant the seeds in a way that would allow the garden to thrive. She imagined herself working in secret at first, learning the rhythms of the plants and the land, and then, when the garden was strong enough, sharing it with the village. The possibilities filled her with hope and excitement. That night, Nia lay in bed thinking about the garden. She could not stop imagining its transformation, the colors, the scents, and the life that would return. She felt a sense of purpose she had never felt before. The garden had called to her, and she had answered. In her mind, she promised herself that she would bring it back to life, no matter how long it took or how difficult it would be. The thought made her heart light with excitement and determination. Nia fell asleep dreaming of green leaves, glowing flowers, and fruit-laden trees. She dreamed of a garden alive with life and laughter, and she knew that tomorrow she would return, ready to begin her work. The secret garden, abandoned and forgotten by the villagers, had found its guardian. And Nia was ready to take on that role with courage, curiosity, and care. The next morning, as sunlight touched the village of Kidali, Nia set out once more toward the garden. She felt a thrill in her chest, a mixture of adventure, responsibility, and excitement. Today would be the first day of her journey to bring life back to a forgotten place, and she was ready for every challenge that came her way. The garden had whispered its secret to her, and she would not let it fade. Nia's first steps into the overgrown garden were cautious but determined. Every plant, every stone, every patch of soil seemed to welcome her presence. She knelt, touched the earth, and whispered softly, "I will take care of you. I will make you bloom again." In that moment, Nia felt a connection with the garden deeper than anything she had experienced. It was as if the garden itself had recognized her courage, curiosity, and kindness. The village of Kidali continued with its daily routines, unaware of the secret adventure unfolding at the edge of the forest. But Nia knew that her discovery would change everything. She had found something special, something forgotten yet full of life. And she had made a promise to herself and to the garden, that she would bring it back to its full glory, no matter how long it took, no matter the obstacles. This was the beginning of an extraordinary journey. Nia's curiosity had led her to a place of mystery, discovery, and potential. She had found the abandoned garden, hidden its secrets, and uncovered the possibility of magic and life waiting to return. And she had decided that she would be the one to make it happen, using her cleverness, determination, and kindness to transform the forgotten garden into something extraordinary. Her adventure had begun. Nyla stood at the edge of the overgrown garden, her eyes wide with curiosity and wonder. The morning sun filtered through the tall trees surrounding the clearing, creating patterns of light and shadow on the weeds that had claimed the garden. Broken tools lay scattered across the soil, rusted and forgotten, hinting at the garden's long-abandoned past. The air was filled with the scent of damp earth, mingled with faint, sweet smells of flowers hidden among the weeds. Nyla's heart raced as she stepped carefully inside. Each step made a soft crunch against the dry leaves and twigs underfoot. She looked around, taking in the scene. The garden was a mixture of neglect and quiet beauty. Though weeds had taken over, there were signs of life everywhere. Tiny sprouts poked through the soil, delicate and green, reaching for the sunlight. A few flowers had survived, their petals glowing faintly as if touched by magic. Nyla knelt to examine one of the small flowers. Its colors were brighter than any she had seen in the village. She gently touched a petal, marveling at its softness and the way the sunlight seemed to make it shimmer. It was like discovering a secret world hidden within the familiar. As Nyla explored, she noticed patterns in the garden that spoke of care and intention. The rows of plants were uneven now, tangled with weeds, but the spacing suggested that someone had once planted them with thought and patience. Paths had been marked with small stones, some of which were now half buried, but the paths hinted at careful planning. Nyla imagined the person who had tended this garden years ago. Perhaps they had loved this place deeply, as she already felt she did. The thought gave her a strange sense of connection to the past, as if she had been meant to find this garden all along. Moving deeper into the garden, Nyla's attention was drawn to a pile of dry leaves in the corner, partially hidden by a low-hanging tree branch. Something about the pile seemed unusual. With a mixture of caution and excitement, she crouched and began brushing the leaves aside. Her fingers uncovered a small wooden box, weathered by time and partially covered in moss. She lifted it carefully, feeling its weight and the promise of discovery inside. The box was small, but it seemed important, as if it had been waiting for someone to find it. Nyla opened the box gently. Inside were several small packets of seeds, some still in paper wrappers, others loose but dry and intact. The colors varied, some were brown, some pale yellow, and a few had a soft green hue. There was also a faded note folded neatly on top. She unfolded it carefully, reading the faint words written in elegant handwriting. "These seeds can bring life to what seems lost." Nyla's eyes widened in surprise and excitement. She held the box in her hands, feeling a thrill run through her body. The garden was not only alive in hidden corners, it held the potential to bloom fully again, to transform into something extraordinary. She studied the seeds, turning each one over in her fingers. Some were small, almost imperceptible, while others were larger and oddly shaped. She wondered what each seed could grow into. Perhaps some were flowers, others fruits, and maybe a few would produce herbs that could be used in medicine or cooking. Her imagination ran wild with possibilities. The note's words echoed in her mind, "Bring life to what seems lost." The garden had been forgotten, but Nyla had discovered it, and now it was her responsibility to care for it. The garden seemed to respond to her presence. Tiny sprouts seemed to stretch taller, the faintly glowing flowers brightened, and the air carried a soft, almost musical hum that Nyla could feel more than hear. It was as if the garden recognized her curiosity, her kindness, and her determination. She felt a deep sense of purpose. She had always loved solving problems, and now she had the perfect challenge. The garden had a secret, and she had been chosen to unlock it. Nyla explored further, observing the plants and imagining how she could help them grow. Some areas were dense with weeds, making it difficult to see the soil beneath. She realized she would need to clear the weeds carefully, without harming the small sprouts that had survived. Other areas were dry and cracked, showing that water had not reached them for some time. She noted which parts needed immediate attention, where she could plant the seeds from the box, and where she might find natural sunlight to encourage growth. Every detail mattered, and her clever mind began forming a plan. As she moved, Nyla discovered other signs of the garden's former magic. Small rocks had been arranged in circles, perhaps as borders or as markers for planting. Faint lines in the soil suggested that water had once flowed through channels to nourish the plants. She could see the care that had been taken long ago, and she felt a responsibility to continue it. The thought made her smile softly. She was not just exploring a forgotten garden, she was reviving a legacy. While examining the soil, Nyla noticed a tiny patch of flowers that were unlike the others. Their petals shimmered in colors that shifted with the sunlight. She knelt down, leaning closer, and could see faint patterns on the petals, almost like small symbols or markings. Her heart leapt. Perhaps these flowers were special, rare, or magical. She carefully marked their location in her mind, knowing she would need to protect and nurture them. The garden was full of mysteries, and each one was an opportunity for learning and discovery. Nyla spent hours in the garden that day, carefully observing, touching, and imagining. She made small notes in her mind. This area would need more sunlight, that patch needed more water, and the seeds in the box must be planted carefully to grow successfully. She discovered small creatures hiding among the plants, worms, insects, and tiny lizards that seemed to have made the garden their home. She watched them move with fascination, understanding that life existed in many forms here. Each creature was part of the garden's hidden magic, and Nyla felt connected to all of it. As the sun climbed higher, Nyla paused to rest on a stone bench partially hidden beneath a tree. She opened the box again, looking at the seeds and the note. Her mind raced with ideas. She imagined planting the seeds in rows, watching them grow day by day, and nurturing the sprouts until they became strong plants. She could picture flowers blooming in bright colors, fruits ripening on trees, and herbs filling the air with fragrance. The garden could be a place of beauty and life, and she could be the one to make it happen. The excitement made Nyla forget about the time. Birds sang and the wind whispered through the leaves, carrying scents of earth and faint flowers. She felt as if the garden itself was alive, breathing gently around her. She imagined the past gardener tending the plants, feeling the same love and care for each sprout. The thought gave her courage. She was not alone in her task. The garden had been waiting for someone who would understand it, and now it had found her. Nyla carefully placed the seeds back into the box and tucked it safely into her basket. She knew she could not plant them all today, but she had learned enough to begin a plan. She would return tomorrow and the next day and every day after until the garden was fully revived. The responsibility thrilled her. It was the kind of challenge she loved, the kind that required thought, patience, and cleverness. She felt proud and excited to begin. Before leaving the garden, Nyla took one last look around. The weeds were still thick, the soil still dry in places, and many flowers were still hidden or wilted. But she saw potential. She could imagine the garden full of life, full of color, and alive with energy. She whispered softly to the plants as if speaking to friends, "I will take care of you. I will help you grow." The air seemed to shimmer slightly, and the tiny glowing flowers swayed in the breeze as if acknowledging her promise. Nyla walked back toward the village, her steps light and eager. She kept the box of seeds hidden, knowing it was precious and needed care. Her mind raced with ideas for the garden. Which seeds to plant first, how to clear the weeds without harming sprouts, and how to use the sunlight and water most effectively. Each thought made her heart beat faster. She had discovered a secret world, and now she had the chance to bring it back to life. That evening, Nyla shared nothing of her discovery with anyone. She wanted to be sure of her plan before speaking. Instead, she wrote in her small notebook, sketching the garden as she had seen it, marking the spots of hidden flowers and sprouts, and making notes about the seeds she had found. She imagined the steps she would take to revive the garden, how she would nurture each plant, and how she would ensure the magical flowers survived. Her mind was filled with ideas and she felt a deep sense of purpose. As night fell over Kidali, Nyla lay in bed, thinking of the garden. She imagined waking early the next morning, carrying her basket of seeds and tools, and returning to the overgrown space. She dreamed of small sprouts growing taller, flowers opening to the sun, and fruits ripening on the trees. She could hear the soft rustle of leaves, the faint hum of hidden magic, and the whisper of possibility in her imagination. Nyla felt as if the garden had become a part of her life, and she could not wait to return and begin its revival. The secret garden, abandoned and hidden for years, had found its guardian. And Nyla, full of curiosity, cleverness, and determination, was ready to take on the task. She knew it would be challenging and she might make mistakes, but she felt confident. The seeds in the box were more than just plants. They were a promise of life, a gift waiting to be nurtured, and Nyla was ready to answer that call. This was the beginning of Nyla's adventure, a journey of discovery, patience, and hope. She had found the garden's secret, and she had accepted her role as its caretaker. Tomorrow the work would begin, and with each day, the garden would grow stronger under her care. Nyla felt a thrill in her heart. She had discovered something extraordinary, and she knew it was just the start of a story she would never forget. Her journey into the secret garden had begun. Every morning, Nyla woke before the sun, her heart full of excitement and determination. She carried her basket of seeds, a small watering container, and a few simple tools she had cleaned and repaired. As she stepped through the village, she noticed curious eyes following her. Some villagers whispered to each other, casting suspicious glances at her as if they could not understand why a young girl would spend so much time in the abandoned garden. "What is she doing out there all alone?" one woman muttered. "It is strange and it might not be safe," another added. Nyla ignored them. She had a mission and the opinions of others could not distract her from it. When she reached the garden, Nyla paused for a moment, taking in the scene. Overnight, a soft layer of dew had formed on the leaves and soil, sparkling in the early sunlight. She could see that some weeds had grown taller, and a few tiny sprouts were now barely visible above the ground. It was a lot of work ahead, but she felt ready. She knelt on the soft earth and began clearing the weeds carefully, making sure not to damage the small plants struggling to grow. Each pull of a weed was slow and deliberate. She worked with patience, knowing that the smallest mistake could harm the fragile sprouts. Nyla planted the seeds she had found in the old wooden box, spacing them carefully in rows and small clusters. She imagined what each seed would grow into. Some would become flowers, others vegetables, and a few might even be herbs that could heal or flavor food. She sprinkled water over the soil gently, watching it seep into the ground, nourishing the seeds. The garden seemed to respond to her care. Tiny sprouts appeared greener and stronger, and the faintly glowing flowers seemed to brighten slightly under the touch of her hands. Even though Nyla was careful, she quickly realized that working in the garden was not easy. Some seeds refused to grow no matter how carefully she planted them. She dug them up gently, examined them, and replanted them in different areas, hoping that the soil, sunlight, or water would help them sprout. Sometimes the weather was her enemy. Sudden rains would pour down, washing away loose soil or flattening the small sprouts she had nurtured. Other days the sun burned too harshly, leaving patches of soil dry and cracked. Each challenge tested her patience, but she refused to give up. She reminded herself that gardens, like all living things, needed time, care, and perseverance. As she worked, Nyla noticed small creatures moving among the plants. Tiny insects crawled along leaves and worms wriggled in the soil, helping to enrich it. Birds landed nearby, chirping and hopping along branches. Nyla learned to work around them, observing how they interacted with the garden. She understood that they were part of the balance of life here. She gently removed weeds from areas where tiny sprouts were struggling, being careful not to disturb the insects or the worms. Each day she became more attuned to the rhythm of the garden and the delicate dance of life within it. The villagers continued to watch her with curiosity. Some of them tried to peer through the fence or from behind the trees, whispering among themselves. "She spends hours there every day," one man said. "It is strange for someone so young." Children from the village watched her from a distance, fascinated by her dedication. A few tried to sneak closer, hoping to see what she was doing, but Nyla always noticed them and smiled kindly, showing that she meant no harm. Over time, the children began to respect her determination, and some even started helping with small tasks like carrying water or picking up fallen leaves. One morning, Nyla faced a particularly difficult challenge. Overnight, a strong wind had knocked over several small sprouts she had planted the previous day. The soil was disturbed, and some seeds were buried too deeply or washed away. She knelt in the mud, examining each plant carefully. She carefully replanted the seeds, adjusting their depth and spacing, and gently patted the soil around them. She whispered encouraging words as if talking to a friend. "Grow strong. You will thrive. I will help you." The garden seemed to respond to her patience and care, and slowly, the sprouts began to straighten and reach upward again. As the days passed, Nyla developed a routine. She would wake early, walk to the garden, and work steadily until the sun reached its peak. She cleared weeds, replanted seeds, watered the soil, and observed the growth of the plants. She made notes in her mind about which areas needed more sunlight or water, and she began experimenting with ways to improve the soil using natural methods she had learned from watching the forest. Each small success filled her with joy and motivation, and even small failures taught her lessons that helped her become wiser in her work. Nyla began noticing patterns in how the garden responded to her care. Some seeds needed more sunlight, while others thrived in shaded areas. Some soil patches were too dry and needed more water, while others retained moisture well. She learned to observe subtle signs like the tilt of a leaf or the color of a stem, to understand what the plants needed. Her cleverness and attention to detail made her increasingly confident. She felt that the garden was teaching her, just as much as she was caring for it. One day she encountered a new obstacle. A group of small animals had wandered into the garden, digging into the soil and trampling sprouts. Nyla realized she would need to protect the fragile plants without harming the animals. She gently built small barriers using sticks and leaves to guide the animals away from the newly planted areas. She also scattered seeds for the animals in a different part of the garden, giving them food so they would not disturb the sprouts. The challenge taught her creativity and resourcefulness, and she felt proud of finding a solution that respected all living things. Despite the difficulties, Nyla noticed progress. Tiny green shoots appeared where the seeds had been planted, and the once dull flowers glowed faintly in the morning light. The garden was beginning to show signs of life again, thanks to her care and patience. Each day as she worked, she felt more connected to the garden. It was no longer just a place of weeds and broken tools, it was becoming a living, breathing space filled with potential. Nyla felt a sense of accomplishment and purpose that she had never experienced before. Even when setbacks occurred, Nyla refused to be discouraged. Heavy rains would sometimes wash away soil or flatten plants, and sometimes pests would nibble at young leaves. Each problem became a lesson. She learned to water the soil carefully, plant seeds at the right depth, and protect delicate sprouts without harming the surrounding life. She began to see that patience and consistency were more important than speed or immediate success. The garden was teaching her resilience, and she embraced the lessons fully. Some villagers began to take notice of the changes. A few who had doubted her began to wonder if she was achieving something extraordinary. They saw small sprouts growing taller, flowers opening, and areas of the garden clearing from weeds. Though most villagers still whispered and watched from a distance, a few came closer to observe her methods. Nyla welcomed them with a quiet smile, allowing them to see that hard work, patience, and care could transform even a neglected space. Over time, the garden began to transform slowly. The first real flowers bloomed, small but vibrant, adding color to the green and brown landscape. Sprouts grew taller, and the soil became richer under her constant care. Nyla felt a sense of pride and satisfaction. She knew that her determination, patience, and clever thinking were responsible for every small change. The garden was responding to her love and attention, and it was teaching her that persistence and dedication could overcome any obstacle. One afternoon, a sudden storm approached. Dark clouds gathered, and the wind began to howl. Nyla knew her plants were vulnerable, and she quickly worked to protect them. She used sticks and leaves to shelter delicate sprouts and covered some with her small cloth to shield them from the heavy rain. The storm was strong and she had to work quickly, but her efforts saved many of the young plants. When the storm passed, she surveyed the garden, noticing the sprouts that had survived. She smiled, proud that her care had protected them through the challenge. Despite the storm, Nyla remained optimistic. She understood that setbacks were part of the journey. Every challenge was an opportunity to learn something new about the garden, about life, and about herself. She continued working every day, clearing weeds, planting seeds, and tending to the soil. Slowly but surely, the garden began to thrive, and her confidence grew. Nyla had learned to trust herself, to observe carefully, and to act with patience and care. As weeks passed, the villagers began to notice the garden's transformation more clearly. Some children started helping, bringing small amounts of water or pulling weeds under her guidance. Elders began offering advice on planting techniques, sharing knowledge passed down through generations. Nyla welcomed their support, seeing that the garden was bringing people together and teaching the village lessons about care, patience, and collaboration. The garden was no longer just a forgotten, abandoned space. It had become a place of learning, growth, and discovery. Nyla's dedication had revived it, teaching everyone who observed her that patience, persistence, and careful attention could bring life back to what seemed lost. She had faced countless challenges, but with each one she had grown stronger, wiser, and more determined. By the end of each day, Nyla would sit on the stone bench at the center of the garden, exhausted but satisfied. She looked at the sprouts, the flowers, and the small signs of life she had nurtured, and she felt a deep sense of pride. The garden had responded to her patience, care, and love, and she knew that it would continue to flourish as long as she remained dedicated. Nyla understood that the garden was teaching her more than just how to grow plants. It was teaching her resilience, resourcefulness, and the value of quiet determination. Even when challenges arose, storms, pests, or stubborn seeds, she learned to face them calmly, to adapt, and to continue working toward her goal. Each day in the garden was an adventure, full of lessons, surprises, and rewards. The villagers, once skeptical, slowly began to respect Nyla's dedication. Though some still whispered, more began to watch in awe as the garden transformed. They saw that her patience and care were bringing life to what had once been forgotten, and they began to understand the power of perseverance and quiet determination. Nyla's challenge was not just for the garden, it was a lesson for the entire village. By the end of the season, the garden was beginning to show real signs of transformation. Sprouts were taller, flowers bloomed in brighter colors, and the soil was rich and fertile. Nyla knew there was still work to do, but she could already see the rewards of her dedication. The garden was coming back to life, and she was proud of the progress she had made through patience, care, and perseverance. Nyla smiled as she stood at the edge of the garden one evening, watching the sun set over her growing paradise. She had faced challenges, setbacks, and doubts, but she had never given up. The garden had responded to her determination, and she knew that, with continued care, it would soon flourish fully. She had learned an important truth: even the smallest efforts, applied with patience and love, could bring life and beauty to the world. One bright morning, Nia entered the garden as usual, carrying her basket of seeds, a small watering container, and the simple tools she had repaired over the past weeks. The garden had already begun to show signs of life. Tiny sprouts pushed through the soil, flowers had begun to open, and the soil was no longer dry and cracked in many places. Yet, as Nia walked among the plants, she noticed a small movement near a patch of flowers she had recently planted. A tiny bird, with feathers ruffled and wings drooping, lay on the ground, unable to fly. Nia's heart immediately went out to it. She knelt down gently, careful not to startle it. "Oh, little one, what happened to you?" she whispered. The bird looked at her with wide, frightened eyes. It trembled slightly, and Nia could see that it was hurt, likely from a fall or being chased by a predator. Nia's mind worked quickly. She remembered what she had learned from observing nature and caring for small creatures. She gathered soft leaves and twigs from the garden and made a small nest in a shaded corner where the bird could rest safely. She used a little water to moisten some grass, making it soft and comfortable for the tiny animal. The bird seemed to understand that she meant no harm. It slowly settled into the nest, closing its eyes, and Nia felt a sense of relief. Over the next few days, Nia carefully tended to the bird. She brought it small seeds to eat, a bit of water, and spent time speaking softly to it. She learned how to gently hold it and check its wing without causing pain. The bird began to regain strength, moving more confidently in its tiny nest. Nia realized that caring for it required patience, just as caring for the garden did. Her days were now divided between tending the plants and helping the bird recover. She did not mind. She felt a deep sense of connection to every living thing around her. One morning, as she spread water near a row of newly sprouted flowers, the bird hopped out of its nest and flew a short distance. It landed near a patch of soil that had been struggling, pecking gently at the ground. Nia watched carefully. The bird seemed to guide her toward certain areas, chirping as if to tell her, "Try here. This soil is better." Following its cues, she dug gently, turned the soil, and planted a few seeds she had brought. Over the next days, she noticed that these seeds sprouted faster and stronger than the others. Nia realized that the bird was helping her in a way she could not have imagined. It was as if the garden itself had sent her a helper. The presence of the bird also seemed to influence the other creatures in the garden. Insects appeared more frequently, bees began visiting flowers, and small animals moved cautiously around the plants. Nia noticed that areas the bird frequented were healthier, with soil richer and leaves greener. She understood that the garden was alive in a way she had not fully realized before. Every action she took and every act of kindness she showed, whether to the bird, plants, or soil, helped the garden flourish. She felt that the life of the garden was intertwined with her care and attention. Over time, the garden transformed in remarkable ways. Flowers began to bloom in vibrant colors, from deep reds to bright yellows and soft blues. The vines grew taller, climbing over broken fences and old trellises, wrapping around supports and reaching for sunlight. Small fruits began to appear on trees, their colors bright against the green leaves. Nia walked through the garden daily, amazed at the growth she witnessed. She realized that her patience, careful work, and the help of the little bird had brought this change. The garden was no longer just a place of plants, it had become a living, breathing space full of energy. The bird stayed with her through it all, often leading her to areas that needed care. Nia noticed that it sometimes chirped near weeds or dry soil, drawing her attention to spots that needed watering or weeding. She followed its guidance, clearing weeds and nurturing the soil. Slowly, she began to understand that the garden was not just responding to her work but also communicating with her through the bird. She felt a deep bond with the tiny creature, realizing that acts of care and kindness could create unexpected help in ways she had never imagined. One day, a small group of village children approached the garden, curious about Nia's daily visits. They watched quietly as she worked, tending to the bird and the plants. Nia smiled at them and invited them to help. The children were hesitant at first, afraid they might harm the delicate plants or the injured bird. But Nia guided them patiently, showing them how to water seedlings carefully and gently pull weeds without disturbing tiny sprouts. The birds seemed to accept their presence too, hopping closer and chirping softly as if encouraging them. Slowly the children began to participate, their small hands helping the garden grow. With the children's help, the garden flourished even more. Nia taught them how to observe the soil, water the plants, and notice changes in the growth of sprouts. She encouraged them to speak gently to the plants, explaining that kindness and patience mattered as much as physical care. The bird watched them intently, often leading the children to areas that needed attention. Nia realized that the garden had become more than a place of growth. It was now a classroom, teaching lessons about care, responsibility, and the importance of every living thing no matter how small. As weeks passed, Nia noticed even more changes. Flowers bloomed continuously, filling the garden with color and fragrance. Vines grew stronger, creating natural arches and shaded areas. The small trees bore fruits that ripened slowly, filling the air with a sweet scent. The garden was alive in ways she had never expected. Every corner seemed to hold energy and life, and even the smallest insects played their part in maintaining balance. Nia understood that her care, combined with the birds' help, had awakened something magical in the garden. One morning, Nia discovered that the bird had led her to a hidden patch near the back of the garden. Here, the soil was richer and sunlight filtered through the trees in just the right way. She planted a few of the seeds she had been saving for special spots, and within days, delicate sprouts appeared. She realized that this hidden area could become the heart of the garden, the place where the most beautiful flowers and strongest plants would grow. She tended it carefully, using the bird's guidance and her own observations. It became a sanctuary within the garden, a place where life seemed most vibrant. Nia also observed how the garden seemed to thrive in response to her care for all living creatures. She placed a small water dish for the birds and insects, making sure everyone had enough to drink. She left some fallen fruits on the ground for small animals, allowing them to eat without harming the plants. Even the soil seemed to benefit from her attention, enriched with fallen leaves and compost she carefully added. She realized that caring for everything, not just the plants, was the key to helping the garden flourish. The villagers began to notice the changes, though most did not yet understand the reason. They saw bright flowers, healthy plants, and fruits appearing on trees that had been barren for years. Whispers traveled through the village, "Nia spends so much time there, but look at the garden." Some villagers were amazed, while others were skeptical. They could not see the bird or the careful work she did daily, yet they could not deny the transformation happening at the edge of the forest. Nia continued her work quietly, knowing that the results would speak for themselves. As the garden grew stronger, Nia felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She understood that her patience, kindness, and attention to detail had created a living system that could sustain itself. The bird, the insects, the small animals, the soil, and the plants all worked together in harmony. Nia had learned that true care went beyond effort. It required respect for every part of life and the willingness to give without expecting immediate reward. The garden flourished because she had loved it completely and nurtured it patiently. One afternoon, a soft breeze carried the scent of flowers across the garden, and the bird flew across the branches, singing joyfully. Nia laughed softly, feeling that the garden was celebrating its revival. The colors were brighter than ever, the vines taller, and the fruits ripening in abundance. She realized that the garden was not just alive because of her hard work but because of the love and care she had shared with every living creature within it. The smallest acts of kindness had created something magnificent. As evening approached, Nia sat quietly on a stone bench, watching the bird hop among the flowers and vines. The garden was calm, full of life, and radiant in the soft light of the setting sun. She thought about how far she had come, from discovering the abandoned garden to nurturing it back to life with the help of a tiny bird. The experience had taught her lessons she would never forget: patience, care, observation, and the magic that kindness could create. The garden had become more than a place to plant seeds. It was now a sanctuary of life, learning, and beauty. The bird, her unexpected helper, had taught Nia that help often comes from the most surprising places. Every creature mattered, and every act of care contributed to the harmony of the garden. Nia felt grateful for the lessons and guidance the bird had provided, realizing that it was a true partner in her efforts. Over the following weeks, the garden continued to grow stronger. Flowers bloomed in every color imaginable, vines intertwined to form natural arches, and fruits ripened abundantly. The bird remained by Nia's side, guiding her gently to areas that needed attention. Other small creatures returned to the garden, drawn by the harmony and abundance. Nia knew that the garden had become a living testament to patience, kindness, and care. The villagers could no longer ignore the transformation. They came to the edge of the forest, amazed at the vibrant colors, the healthy plants, and the abundance of life. Some were curious and others were inspired. Nia welcomed them quietly, showing them how to care for the plants and respect the living creatures within the garden. They began to understand the magic of what she had done, not through spells or charms, but through simple, consistent acts of care and kindness. Nia stood in the center of the garden, the bird perched on her shoulder, as the sunlight glinted off the colorful flowers and rich leaves. The vines had grown tall, the fruits glowed in the sunlight, and the garden hummed with life. She realized that this was more than just her accomplishment. It was a partnership with nature, built on observation, patience, and love. The garden had responded to her care, but it had also taught her lessons she would carry forever. The garden was no longer just a hidden, forgotten space. It was alive, vibrant, and magical. Nia smiled, knowing that her kindness and patience had created something extraordinary. The bird chirped softly as if agreeing, and the garden seemed to shimmer with its new energy. Nia felt a deep connection to every living thing within it, understanding that the true magic of the garden came from care, love, and respect for all life, no matter how small. The garden, once abandoned and silent, had found new life through Nia's determination, patience, and kindness, and through the unexpected help of a small, injured bird that became her guide, friend, and partner. Word spread quickly through the village of Kidali that the abandoned garden at the edge of the forest had transformed into something extraordinary. The villagers had long forgotten it, dismissing it as a place overrun with weeds and decay. But now, stories of bright flowers, healthy fruits, and playful birds traveling freely through the branches reached every corner of the village. People began to gather at the edge of the forest, their eyes wide with curiosity and awe. No one had ever imagined that such life and beauty could emerge from what had once seemed so forgotten. Nyla stood quietly in the center of the garden, her hands resting on the soft earth. She watched as villagers approached cautiously, their faces filled with amazement. Some held their hands to their mouths, unable to speak at first. Children ran ahead, their laughter ringing through the garden as they admired the colorful flowers and darting birds. Elders walked slowly, taking in the rich scents and the sight of fruits hanging from healthy trees. The garden was alive in ways no one had expected. Nyla felt a quiet pride, but she did not boast. Instead, she smiled softly, happy to share the beauty she had nurtured. When the villagers reached her, Nyla spoke gently. "This garden belongs to everyone now," she said. "It will thrive if we care for it together." Some villagers were hesitant, unsure if they could be trusted with such a delicate place. But as they looked around, seeing the care and attention in every corner, they felt a growing desire to help. They realized that the garden's transformation was not the result of magic alone, but of dedication, patience, and kindness. Nyla had taught them that the smallest acts of care could lead to great beauty. The children were the first to begin helping. Nyla guided them as they planted new seeds and cleared soil. She showed them how to water gently, how to remove weeds without disturbing the sprouts, and how to speak softly to the plants, explaining that love and attention helped them grow. The children listened eagerly, their eyes shining with excitement. Some began exploring the garden with curiosity, discovering hidden corners and tiny flowers they had not noticed before. Nyla laughed softly as she watched them, happy to see their wonder and joy. The elders contributed too, offering advice from years of experience in planting and caring for the land. They shared knowledge about natural fertilizers, irrigation methods, and ways to protect the garden from pests. Nyla listened carefully, absorbing their wisdom and applying it to her work. Together, they created a system of care that respected both the garden and the natural world around it. The villagers began to work side by side, and the garden became a place of learning, growth, and collaboration. As the weeks passed, the garden flourished like never before. Flowers bloomed in vivid colors, vines climbed tall and strong, and fruits ripened in abundance. Birds and small animals returned in numbers, filling the garden with movement and sound. The air was rich with fragrance and the soil was dark and fertile. Nyla walked among the plants, gently touching the leaves and flowers, feeling a sense of accomplishment that warmed her heart. She realized that the garden's magic had been born not only from the seed she had planted but from the care, attention, and kindness she had shared with all living things. One sunny morning, Nyla decided it was time for the final, most surprising step. She gathered the ripest fruits, gently removed seeds from the plants, and placed them in small packets. Each seed was carefully labeled, and Nyla thought about the joy they could bring to every household in the village. She had learned that sharing life and care multiplied its power. With the help of the villagers, she began distributing the seeds. Families took them eagerly, grateful for the gift of life and the chance to grow their own gardens. Children carried seeds to their homes, elders planted them in family plots, and the entire village joined in spreading the magic that had been nurtured in Nyla's garden. As seeds were planted across the village, Nyla watched with quiet satisfaction. She realized that the garden's influence would now extend far beyond its borders. Every home would have the opportunity to cultivate life, to experience the joy of growth, and to understand the importance of patience and care. The lessons she had learned, about kindness, attention, and the interconnectedness of all living things, would live on in every plot of land, every sprout, and every bloom. The village would never forget the garden's transformation and the young girl who had made it possible. The villagers began to visit the garden regularly, helping with planting, watering, and harvesting. Children played among the flowers, learning about the plants and animals, while elders shared stories and advice. The garden became a center of life, a place where knowledge, kindness, and growth intertwined. Nyla guided them with gentle patience, always encouraging them to notice the small details, the way a leaf unfurled, the way a flower opened, the way a small bird rested in a branch. She wanted everyone to understand that every action mattered, and that caring for something, even something small, could create profound beauty. One day the village held a small celebration in the garden. Villagers gathered to admire the fruits, flowers, and healthy plants that now filled the space. They shared food, laughed, and told stories of the garden's transformation. Nyla stood quietly in the background, watching the joy and gratitude spread among the people. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had begun her journey alone, facing challenges and setbacks, but her patience and care had inspired an entire community. The garden was no longer hers alone, it belonged to everyone. Even the animals played a role in the celebration. Birds perched on branches, chirping softly, and small creatures moved freely among the plants. Nyla noticed that the bird she had cared for months ago flew proudly around the garden, guiding others to areas that needed attention. It was a reminder that help often comes in unexpected forms, and that kindness given freely could return in ways no one could predict. Nyla smiled, realizing that the garden had taught her lessons about trust, patience, and the importance of nurturing life in all its forms. As the day came to an end, Nyla walked slowly through the garden, observing the blooms, the fruits, and the healthy soil. She touched the plants gently, whispering words of encouragement. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from discovering the forgotten garden to reviving it with care and patience, to sharing it with the entire village. The garden had become a living symbol of what could happen when determination, love, and community worked together. Nyla also thought about the seeds she had distributed. She knew that each one carried a piece of the garden's magic and the lessons she had learned. Families planting them would experience growth, patience, and the joy of life unfolding before their eyes. The garden's magic would live on forever, not through enchantment, but through care, dedication, and shared responsibility. Nyla felt proud knowing that her work had created something lasting, something that would touch generations to come. The villagers no longer whispered about her strange behavior. Instead, they spoke in admiration and gratitude. They realized that her patience, cleverness, and love had transformed not only the garden but the entire village. Children laughed as they planted seeds in their homes, elders shared advice, and families worked together to nurture life. Nyla's quiet determination had inspired everyone to see the power of care, patience, and kindness. In the weeks that followed, the garden continued to thrive. Flowers bloomed brighter, vines grew stronger, and fruits appeared in greater abundance. The bird and other small animals continued to guide Nyla and the villagers, helping to maintain the garden's balance. The village had learned that caring for the garden required teamwork, observation, and respect for all living things. The garden had become a living classroom, teaching lessons far beyond what Nyla could have imagined. Every day, Nyla walked through the garden with a sense of peace and purpose. She remembered the first day she had discovered it, overgrown, abandoned, and forgotten, and compared it to the vibrant paradise it had become. She smiled, proud of her work, but also humble, knowing that the transformation had come from a combination of her care, the help of the bird, and the involvement of the entire village. The garden was alive because of collaboration, patience, and shared dedication. One afternoon, Nyla paused at the center of the garden, looking around at the thriving plants, playful animals, and smiling villagers. She reflected on the lessons she had learned, that small actions matter, that patience can overcome challenges, and that kindness given to any living thing can create extraordinary results. She realized that the garden's magic was not in the plants or seeds themselves, but in the care, love, and attention she and the villagers had shared. As evening fell, the village gathered for a final celebration in the garden. Families brought fruits and flowers, sharing them with neighbors. Children danced along the paths, laughing and singing. Elders spoke of the lessons they had learned from Nyla, about patience, observation, and the importance of nurturing life. Nyla stood quietly, her heart full of joy, knowing that the garden had become a symbol of hope, growth, and community. At the end of the celebration, Nyla harvested seeds from the most vibrant plants. She carefully packaged them and distributed them to every family in the village. Each seed was a gift, a promise of life, and a reminder of the lessons learned in the garden. Families planted them at home, ensuring that the garden's magic, care, and kindness would continue to grow beyond the original space. Nyla smiled, knowing that the garden's influence would now be felt throughout the village, touching every home and every family. The abandoned garden had become more than a place of plants. It had become a living, breathing symbol of life, growth, and shared care. Nyla's patience, kindness, and cleverness had transformed not only the garden but the village itself. Children, elders, and families alike had learned that small acts of care, combined with patience and attention, could create something extraordinary. Nyla looked around one last time as the sun set, casting golden light across the thriving garden. Birds flew overhead, flowers swayed in the gentle breeze, and fruits glimmered in the fading sunlight. She felt a deep sense of peace and accomplishment. Her journey had begun with curiosity, led to discovery, and continued through challenges and unexpected help. Now it had reached a beautiful ending that would continue in every seed planted across the village. The garden was no longer a secret. It was a place of life, learning, and shared joy. The villagers had come together, children had learned the value of care, and elders had shared their wisdom. And through it all, Nyla had remained humble, teaching by example that love, patience, and dedication could transform the world. The seeds she had shared ensured that the garden's spirit would live on forever. Wherever a seed sprouted, the lessons of care, kindness, and patience would take root. The village of Kidali had been transformed, not just by the garden, but by the understanding that every action mattered, every act of care had value, and every living thing deserved attention and respect. Nyla walked home that evening with a heart full of gratitude and satisfaction. She had discovered, nurtured, and shared something extraordinary. The garden would continue to grow, and its magic would live on in every household, every plant, and every life it touched. She knew that her adventure had not just been about plants, it had been about life, connection, and the power of patience and care. From that day on, the garden became a symbol of hope, learning, and kindness for the entire village. Children, adults, and elders all understood the lessons Nyla had shown them through her work. And the seed she had distributed ensured that the garden's magic, care, and lessons would continue for generations, a living legacy of patience, love, and determination. The abandoned garden was no longer forgotten. It was a paradise nurtured by care, guided by kindness, and shared with the village. And Nyla had shown that one person, through determination, patience, and love, could transform not just a garden, but an entire community.